Drake Maye is one of the most fascinating quarterback prospects to enter the NFL draft in recent memory. Just how valuable could he be in your dynasty leagues? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. You can also read her at Pro Football Focus and Behind the Steel Curtain. On today's show, we are breaking down Drake Maye, the quarterback prospect from North Carolina, talking about his dynasty value, pro comparisons. We're going to talk some deep dive into the analytics. But let's first start about just the player in the overview, Kate. What did you see from Drake Maye on film?
You've got a lot to like about NFL prospect Drake Maye here, who has that perfect prototypical size, 2-year starter at UNC, and he, by all accounts, was one of the most productive quarterbacks in the Power Five. I mean, top to bottom, I just thought a really solid passer, but also a guy with really solid athleticism. Not as creative as Caleb Williams. And you'll see in the open field that he'll take what the defenses give him, especially with his legs, but definitely not as creative a playmaker as Caleb Williams. So I got to say, watching these two back to back, there's a sense of deflation a little bit here. But I mean, Drake Maye, you got to love, especially the size. I mean, came in just over 6'4", 3/8 inches, 223 pounds, does have slightly smaller hands, but in addition to that prototypical size, he's got arm strength for days. I really liked his tape. Just definitely has some inconsistencies.
Yeah, I think Drake Maye is a very, very good quarterback prospect. And in most years, I think he probably is the number one overall pick because there's just not a lot of quarterbacks out there with his size, good athleticism, and good arm talent. Plus, what also really helps Drake Maye, he's got 2 years of really good production where that's just not the case for most quarterbacks. But in a class with Caleb Williams and in a class with Jaden Daniels, there's a chance that he's the third quarterback off the board. Listen, I know that my guy Mel Kiper even this morning said that J.J. McCarthy might overtake Drake Maye. I think that's a little wild. I don't see that happening.
That's a little rich for me, for sure.
Well, we're going to get to J.J. Don't you worry. I want to talk about the positives here with Drake Maye because, frankly, Kate, there are a lot of them. If you're watching with us on YouTube right now, you can see a graphic that we have. He's got outstanding size. Like you couldn't ask for better size from a quarterback. I thought his arm strength is well above average. I'm not sure he's quite as, if he has like a rubber arm like Caleb Williams, where you can make all these ridiculous and wild throws. But in terms of overall velocity and throw power and arm strength, he's got it all, right? I also love, he's a good runner. He's not Josh Allen. But he's a very good runner that can beat you with his legs. And then on top of that, he's not afraid of standing in the pocket, taking shots and throwing the ball down the field. He's a courageous thrower. And we just typically don't see that a lot coming out of the college ranks. So, man, for the old school scouts that like size, speed, athleticism, standing in the pocket, he really does check all of those boxes.
I think that's a great point. He is just he's a quarterback, man. Like he is, I feel like a very prototypical type of quarterback. And he does offer you a lot of versatility. That athleticism, especially at that size, like he, even though, like I said, not as creative a runner as a Caleb Williams, but can definitely take advantage of weak spots in a defense with his legs, which I found all the more impressive because he moves much better than a guy who is 6'4". Like he's not an awkward runner at that size, which you love to see that. And Marcus, obviously for fantasy, the code is the rushing upside, right? And that's not to say that he like builds his game and structures his game around the run, because I'm not going to say that, but I mean, back-to-back seasons of, 400 plus rushing yards, 16 touchdowns over the last 2 seasons on the ground. That's a very nice supplement if he can continue to exploit defenses with that. And I mean, yeah, like from the gate as a redshirt freshman, just so productive. In his first season as a quarterback in the NCAA, 4,300 passing yards, 38 touchdowns, 7 interceptions. And
Yep.
I think just built on that really solid opening year in year 2. Like I definitely understand the flash of Jaden Daniels and obviously the athleticism, the rushing upside. Like there's so much upside, I think, with Jaden Daniels in the next level. But Drake Maye just feels like he has a pretty solid and safe floor here in the next level.
So a couple things I wanted to touch on really quickly regarding Drake Maye. I know a lot of people are probably wondering, okay, what's the difference between him and Sam Howell, who put up ridiculous stats at UNC, was it during the 2021 season? To me, it's all about throwing over the middle. Now, Sam Howell did throw down the field in the middle, but because Drake Maye is just so much bigger and frankly taller, right? He is actually able to hit the short to the intermediate throws, which translates more to the NFL. We saw in the NFL for Sam Howell, basically everything has to be on the perimeter, and it's just really hard to live that way in the National Football League. But for Maye, he is so good at like the 12-yard throws right across the seam of the defense. He's excellent in that area. In fact, he's far superior in that area than Caleb Williams is. It's one of the reasons I do like Drake Maye quite a bit, as I think he's going to be able to come in right away and have success throwing to tight ends, throwing to slot receivers, all great things. Now, as for his weaknesses, there's just too many times where he misses layups. And for me, it's because I think it's the fundamentals. He's got such a good arm that sometimes he doesn't need to set his feet to make a throw, and it gets him in trouble. He's too good of a player to miss this many easy throws, whether it's a screen pass where, okay, sometimes you can throw a screen pass and it's completed, but it's not accurate, right? You throw it a little bit high and the receiver needs that extra moment just to kind of gather himself before getting up the field. That limits the yards after catch ability. Even on slants, sometimes I think the accuracy is a little bit hit and miss. The decision-making, especially in the second half of this year, wasn't as good as we saw in 2022. And then when you watch him and Caleb Williams go back-to-back, it's just so clear that his release is a tick slower. And in the NFL, that's going to matter. I think he can speed it up. I think he's got the potential to do that. All these weaknesses, I think, are fixable, but I do think they could cause him to potentially get overtaken by Jaden Daniels in the NFL draft.
I think that's definitely fair. And again, for all of the sort of, I think, safety that Maye offers, I do think Daniels has a little bit more upside to his overall profile, which I do think could be sort of that definitive edge in terms of this draft capital. Now, we already know, Chicago Bears, Caleb Williams, it is happening. With the second overall pick, we've got the Washington Commanders, third overall pick, the New England Patriots. Which of these offenses do you think are going to bite? Because I feel like the Washington Commanders, having just lived through the Sam Howell experiment, albeit Sam Howell just under 4 inches shorter than Drake Maye. Any chance that the Washington Commanders could do a little helmet scouting themselves and just avoid Drake Maye for the sake of it?
I don't think they're going to pass on Drake Maye because he went to North Carolina. I think they're going to pass on Drake Maye, though, because Jaden Daniels is just so much more dynamic as a runner, and defensive coordinators or defensive-minded head coaches like Dan Quinn is, They hate playing against those type of quarterbacks, so they tend to gravitate to the quarterbacks that they hate scheming against. So I do see Drake Maye potentially falling to pick number 3 to the New England Patriots, and maybe even a little bit further than that. We're going to talk about some potential landing spots maybe later on the show and how that's going to affect his dynasty value, Kate. But I want to talk about some numbers that you and I, both writers for Pro Football Focus. We love to get into the analytics. Let's dive into that regarding Drake Maye next. This episode is brought to you by Robinhood. Did you know that even if you have a 401k for retirement, you can still have an IRA? Robinhood has the only IRA that gives you a 3% boost on every dollar that you contribute when you subscribe to Robinhood Gold. But get this, now through April 30th, Robinhood is even boosting every single dollar that you transfer in from other retirement accounts with a 3% match. That is right, no cap on the 3% match. Robinhood Gold gets you the most for your retirement thanks to their IRA with a 3% match. This offer is good through April 30th. Get started at robinhood.com/boost. Subscription fees apply. And now for some legal info. Claim as of Q1 2024, validated by Radius Global Market Research. Investing involves risk, including loss. Limitations apply to IRAs and 401ks. 3% match requires Robinhood Gold from 1 year from the date of your first 3% match. Must keep Robinhood IRA for 5 years. The 3% matching on transfers is subject to specific terms and conditions. Robinhood IRA, available to U.S. customers in good standing. Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, is a registered broker-dealer. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Kay, let's dive into some of the numbers when it comes to Drake Maye. We did so yesterday with Caleb Williams, found out that he was excellent on 3rd and 4th down, excellent on some of the big money downs in the league. What can you tell us about Drake Maye analytically?
Drake Maye has a fantastic profile analytically. I mean, Marcus, across the board, like you mentioned the ability of Caleb Williams on 3rd and 4th down, that's matched with Drake Maye. From a clean pocket, excellent. On throws at or beyond the sticks, excellent. Great on no play action, excellent. I mean, in all of these metrics, ranked 80th plus percentile, and most of those were in the 90 plus percentile. Like, from a standpoint of what he's done over the last 2 seasons, there's no doubt that he's very well rounded as a passer. And you know, Marcus, for those of you who maybe missed our Caleb Williams profile, like go back and listen to that, because we talked a lot about, the passing grades on no play action, which can be a little bit of a cheat code at the NFL level. Like, to see that kind of production and efficiency from Drake Maye without that cheat code, you love to see that. And we also talked a lot about what a quarterback's productivity from a clean pocket can mean, and it is more predictive of what they're able to do and sort of their innate skills versus some of those extraneous factors, because you're not always going to face pressure, right? It's inconsistent. So clean pocket grade, something that's very important and predictive. And I mean, across the board, Marcus, Drake Maye passes the analytics test with flying colors.
Yeah, there's so many other stats that I want to dive into as well. Big time throw rate was 7.7% in college football this year. That's 10th in the nation. He also had a turnover worthy rate of just 1.9%. That was tied for 11th in the nation. Like, the analytics absolutely love him. And even you look just like simply at grades, he had a deep passing grade of 97, which was the highest in college football. Like, he is so clean when it comes to analytics. The only thing I will say, the pressure rate and how he handles pressure was not super great, but neither was Caleb Williams. And we saw that yesterday when we were diving into some of his analytics. Like, tend to play a little bit of hero ball when he got pressure on him. It's very common for quarterbacks that are this highly touted to try to want to make a big play on every single snap. So I get it. I'm not going to completely knock him. This just all goes back to the original point at the beginning of the show. In almost any other draft, like look at last year, he is so supremely more talented than Bryce Young. He's the better prospect than Bryce Young. He would have been the number one pick. Now, CJ Stroud should have been the number one pick, but in terms of just as a prospect, he's so much cleaner than somebody like Bryce Young. There's really not a lot not to like. The only thing that you and I are struggling with a little bit is he as flashy or as dynamic as Caleb Williams and Jane Daniels? And how does that impact where we have him ranked? That's all it is for me.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned the analytics too, and the pressure to sack rate actually pretty similar to Caleb Williams, like we had mentioned yesterday. Actually a little bit better in terms of pressure to sack rate. 19.5% of pressures converted to sacks for Drake Maye. I like to see that number a little bit lower. Want him to take less sacks. Took 29 total last season, which ranked 19th among quarterbacks in the Power 5. You like to see those numbers lower, but I do also want to stress, Marcus, and I don't even know that we brought up Drake Maye's age. He's 21 years old. Like there is a lot of room to grow in terms of decision making, because again, like though he has 2 seasons under his belt as a starting quarterback out at North Carolina, he's also really, really young. And I think there's plenty of room to grow. You just hope that, to clean up some of these areas of his game, you want to see him go to an offense with the right staff to develop him.
Where would you like to see him go? Like what?
Oh, Marcus, that's an interesting one, because I'm going to be honest, I don't know that I trust really any of these front offices here in the top end of the draft. I'm kind of struggling with a landing spot for him. And I want him to be in a place where he can be surrounded by some talent, right? Like he's not going to go to the Chargers. They have a quarterback that actually is comped to Drake Maye quite often here. New England Patriots, you look at the surrounding cast, they just announced today that they're going to be bringing Hunter Henry back on a deal, but like not much there for Drake Maye to work with. Maybe the best fit, honestly, is the Washington Commanders. And, for as much, disappointment as we have with guys like Jahan Dotson, and, we've talked about the value of Terry McLaurin and maybe the lower upside than like, I do think that could be a really interesting fit. Right? I honestly think Washington's probably the best landing spot for him.
I like the Washington fit as well because you have the receivers. We talked about Dan Quinn before, how you would think that generally a defensive-minded head coach likes to run the ball, play turnover-free football. That's just not the case for Dan Quinn. He actually likes it. He likes his quarterbacks to throw the ball all over the field. So I think in Washington, in a fast-paced offense with those receivers, hopefully upgrade the offensive line. I agree. I think that's a really, really good fit. Ken, I want to talk about Drake Maye's current dynasty value and who he best compares to in the NFL. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by Gametime. You shouldn't have to worry when you're buying tickets to your next big event. Gametime is the fastest and the easiest way to buy tickets for all of the sports, music, comedy, and theater events near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Gametime is the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. See the view from your seats before you buy so you know exactly what to expect when you arrive. All-in prices show your total upfront so you know that you're getting a great deal before you check out. Buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code Locked On for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account, redeem promo code Locked On for $20 off. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. Everydayers. On Monday's show, we're going to break down Jaden Daniels, quarterback from LSU, who we've been referencing a lot on this podcast, so make sure you check that out. We're also going to be doing some free agency stuff later in the week once we get some official landing spots for some of the top free agents. It's an absolutely loaded running back class, so we'll make sure we talk about that as well. But, Kate, let's talk about pro comparisons before we get to Drake Maye's dynasty value. Who do you compare him to?
I think the most common comp that I am seeing, and I actually think it's a pretty good one, is Justin Herbert. And the reason I like this comp is because we know that Justin Herbert can utilize his athleticism to leverage defenses, but it's not the primary aspect of his game. I think from a build perspective, from a arm perspective, I think the fit makes sense. But Marcus, you actually had a more interesting comp that I want to talk a little bit more about because
Oh, no.
I'm going to need to hear more about it.
So-
Share with our delightful listeners, who is your Drake Maye comp?
Anytime you give a comp, there's always people on both ends of the spectrum saying either too high or too low. But to me, Drake Maye reminds me, I'm going to make sure I preface this, peak Carson Wentz. If you remember Carson Wentz with the Eagles, like in 2017, that was a MVP candidate quarterback before he got injured. But like Carson Wentz, Drake Maye has that big body. I think the release is a little slow, but he's highly accurate. He's more dynamic as a runner than you think, but he can tend to miss some easy throws because the fundamentals aren't there. I know Carson Wentz, you and I talked about this yesterday because of the injury. I think he lost some confidence once he was benched for Nick Foles or once Nick Foles replaced him. But I think Carson Wentz stylistically, and maybe upside wise, is what Drake Maye could be in the NFL.
I think that's fair. Yeah, I think there are a whole different podcast we can talk about what led to the demise of Carson Wentz. I do think the confidence factor, like it really just seems like Nick Foles coming in from behind him and winning a Super Bowl probably didn't do great on the mentals for Carson Wentz. But when he was at his peak, I think he exhibited a lot of those same qualities here that we're talking about with Drake Maye. Again, I'm going to bring up the athleticism, but having that not be the only crux of his game, I think is kind of point on, which, for a high-end comp, I'll say Justin Herbert, but for a very reasonable and measured comp, I think Carson Wentz feels it feels right. Let's talk about his dynasty value. And obviously dynasty value will fluctuate based on landing spot. But right now in dynasty leagues, I took a look at consensus Superflex rankings for rookies, courtesy of Fantasy Pros. Caleb Williams, no surprise, coming in at the 101. Just behind him, Marvin Harrison Jr., then LSU quarterback Jaden Daniels, LSU wide receiver Malik Neighbors, and then Drake Maye actually coming in 5th overall in consensus Superflex rookie rankings. So tell me what you think about that valuation, because usually, obviously, in a Superflex, you tend to see these quarterbacks weighted more heavily. I'm personally kind of surprised to see Drake Maye behind Malik Neighbors in the ranks, but that's where I'm at.
Yeah, I'm with you. I understand that Malik Neighbors is a really good wide receiver prospect and probably going to be a top 6 pick. There's just no way that I'm taking him over Drake Maye, who's going to be a top 5 pick in this class. The quarterbacks are so valuable in a super flex league. I think that's a steal. And I think Drake Maye is just a steal overall in your dynasty super flex leagues, being drafted on average as QB 19 behind quarterbacks like Jared Goff, Brock Purdy, Tua. I would rather have Drake Maye than all of those guys. So yeah, I actually think Drake Maye, pretty good value right now in your super flex leagues.
Yeah, right now in my overall Superflex rankings. Drake Maye sitting at 4, ahead of LSU wide receiver Malik Neighbors, but notably, he is my QB3 at this current moment. Obviously, landing spot can change that around a little bit, but we'll talk about Jaden Daniels, my QB2, on Monday's show, and I'm very excited to do that. But for me, it definitely comes down to overall upside. And Jaden Daniels, I think, probably has a lower floor for me at the next level, but a much higher ceiling. Drake Maye, I just think from the safety that he brings as a prospect, I'm going to take him over Neighbors. Let's talk about his value in a single quarterback league. So pretty similar rankings overall. Obviously, the quarterbacks pushed down a little bit here in the ranks. Caleb Williams coming in 6th overall in the consensus single quarterback rankings. Drake Maye still coming in QB3 in this class, but at the 112. So that means we currently have in the consensus rankings 3 quarterbacks inside the first round of your rookie drafts. How do you feel about that evaluation? Because that in a single quarterback league feels a little bit more rich to me.
Yeah, that I agree. I can't get behind Drake Maye as a first round pick in single QB leagues. I would just much rather at that point gamble on the running backs there. As you're seeing, if you're watching on YouTube, no running backs in the first 6 picks. I think that's where you're going to get the Jonathan Brooks, the Trey Bensons, the Braylon Allens, all those type of players. I would just rather gamble on a receiver or a running back there. And then maybe in this late 2nd or 3rd round, that's where you take a shot on Bo Nix or Michael Penix. So in standard, single QB dynasty leagues, not that interested in Drake Maye, but in super flex leagues, I'm in.
Yeah, 100% fair. And for as much it's maybe I'm not touting Drake Maye's overall upside, I do think he offers something with that rushing floor that he's probably going to add you another 1 to 3 fantasy points per game minimum with some of that rushing upside, which you're going to take that all day most often over a lot of these pocket passers that we are seeing sort of in those mid-range tiers here in Dynasty.
Absolutely. So Drake Maye, again, really good quarterback prospect. He's not our number 1. And in fact, he's not our number 2 either. But we still really like him. We still are really valuing him in super flex leagues, not so much in 1 QB leagues, but it's very dependent on the situation. If he ends up falling a little bit in the draft and ending up in a better spot than maybe that we anticipate, let's say, I'm just making this up. What if he falls to 6 and Minnesota is the team that trades up to get him to replace Kirk Cousins? I think all of a sudden we're moving him way up now that he's playing with Justin Jefferson, TJ Hawkinson, Jordan Addison.
Yes.
So just put a pin in this until we get some more information about where Drake Maye lands. But again, a very, very good prospect that I am excited about in our dynasty leagues. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty Football your first listen every single day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Go download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Majuk. I'm at Marcus _Mosher. Enjoy your weekend, and we will see you right back here on Monday.